Did we need all this extra regulation? Academics would say absolutely not. Our regulation was absolutely sufficient. Regulation's always going to be behind. The rules that govern cars came after there was loads of cars on the road.
If you release technology out there, it's also how it's used.
Is there anything in Ireland that we can't do?
Things are now moving at a speed that really excites me.
Hi everybody, I'm Sharif from Defactor, Head of Technology and Innovation. I've got Brian Elders.
Also co-founder.
And Deborah Hutton, Managing Partner of DEH Law, Chair of the G100 for Ireland, and one of the co-founders of Reclosure Limited, a fintech company in Ireland.
Super. And the purpose of this segment is, real world assets, world being the appropriate term, jurisdictions, and where can people do business? Where's open for business? Pros, cons. Where would you start?
Well, we can start maybe in the world of crypto and say it started in the sunny islands and it's busy making its way onshore. And if you look at the various different jurisdictions, even in Europe, but also across the world, in the major financial centres, I think at this stage, when it comes to the tokenization of assets, most have some sort of framework to fit into. You can argue that some are better than others, but you definitely see across Europe and France and Germany, in Singapore and Hong Kong and other jurisdictions like this, we'll say the initial projects getting launched and some certainty emerging around what was an uncertain sector.
I always think take a business approach, which is where are your target investors located? So that's the first question. Cost of doing business. So you'll look at the cost of staff and what you're looking at there, which is actually reducing now with the use of AI in the models. Reputation, because even across Europe, we've seen that the reputation of certain regulators, there can be issues in terms of transfer funds and how legislation is implemented. And in that regard, the Central Bank of Ireland has a very good reputation in Europe. We can look at models. If we look at the hubs on fintech, you're still looking at US. You're looking at Asia. And UK is still up there, and Ireland has certainly benefited from entities establishing their European hub here in Ireland, because what does Ireland offer? Common law jurisdiction, English speaking, and access to certain of these hubs and good relationships with US, Asia, and obviously UK, and indeed across Europe. Yeah, so I'm sounding very pro-Ireland, but we will talk about some of the models. For example, in Germany, I'm very impressed at what we're seeing there in terms of some of the regulation with specific legislation for types of crypto custodians.
If you're a technology product and you ship something and it's, on a public blockchain and is usable around the world, people can connect the wallet in a permissionless manner. And, we've no idea whether our customers are from Zambia or Hong Kong or China or somewhere else. I mean, how do you navigate that?
You make me smile, but it's only because I'm sad. Because it's coming with the technology angle. The reason I'm sad, I'm thinking intellectual property and protection of that. Obviously, US has a great benefit there, or harmonization of tax laws, which we don't have in Europe. So those are two big big things. So that's obviously competitive pieces there. Not knowing where your customers are, that's why I'm saying the European regulation, at least that deals with that. And also the type of customers do we think, and that'll sort of be driven by what price these tokenized assets are going to be. Are they likely to be retail investors or qualifying investors? So that approach differs.
And is putting a landing page and a warning enough? No US. Is that sufficient, or do I need to do more? Or you have the KYC, but KYC where? I mean, how do you do this?
And again, we're talking broad strokes. Get specific advice on your particular project, but this is interesting in that even in the unregulated space on digital assets, and it goes back to a much broader concept of law, point, which is, did we need all this extra regulation? And certain academics would say absolutely not. Our regulation was absolutely sufficient and you could have done without all this, because now we're reinventing the wheel unnecessarily. And a great example of that, to your point, was marketing. And if we look at what happened in Spain, UK and other jurisdictions where we had, say, influencers marketing a digital asset, and they just got it under basic consumer marketing law to say, you know, that they were in breach of certain marketing requirements in terms of dealing with the public. And Spain, if you have, now again, I'm not a Spanish lawyer, but as I understand it, taking the law hat off, if you have a site that's in Spanish, you're deemed to be marketing into Spain. And so there's this aspect of it. And I often go back to the first principles of law when you're thinking about things, which is, what am I doing? And how am I managing risks? And am I doing anything inappropriate? And so you even see this in ESG legislation, and there's obviously ESG with the tokens. And so we look at Asia, you know, the approach to this, because that's a big topic, and then the interaction of AI, so things can be addressed. But when we're looking at marketing, do we really think a disclaimer is enough? How would we be approaching, you know, stopping the wrong people invest in this? You know, these games where they were encouraging small children to rack up fees. So I don't think I even need to ask that, you know, like, could you defend that logically? And it's putting that procedure in place with an element of common sense as well. So you can look at the law.
There's a lot of existing laws that exist that are very useful
and just
in
be
protecting
practical about it, and then keep the training up. But don't get lost in the woods. Keep going back to, why am I doing this? Does it make sense? And can I hand on heart go, no, this is sensible. And again, when we look at asset classes that are risky, for example, property is, you know, deemed to be highly illiquid. But then if you're tokenizing, fractionalizing, and putting a product that's now social housing, something good for the environment, now it's a small percentage of a portfolio. Now does that become suitable for retail? Now it's tokenized and essentially like a listed instrument. So you start seeing, you know, it's the thought process, the governance.
But there's also the concept of that if you release technology out there, it's also how it's used. If you have a car, it can be a taxi or an ambulance, or it can be a passenger car. It's still a car. And you can use technology in a variety of different ways as well. So just because you have a piece of technology, it can be the contextual use of it that's important as well for the user of the technology.
That's the gun argument, I think.
Was it? The car argument or the gun argument?
But
it's how it's used as much as the technology itself.
Now, this is interesting from, like, the central bank has a concept in Ireland, and sorry to bring it back, other regulators across Europe and the world no doubt has similar cases like this. I'm just trying to draw something where they talk at a top level that the regulator would have what they call gatekeeper meetings. And they don't want those senior people in industry, whether they're lawyers or business persons, saying this is what the law says and I've complied, but to actually be beyond that and interact in a transparent manner. So when you're looking at this technology, you have to look at, could this disrupt market infrastructure and what is the ripple effect? And that could be quite a very serious thing. So, for example, if we look at the money market crisis, where large institutions were investing in money market funds, so money market fund, you invest a US dollar and you come out in US dollar, and you're supposed to always get your money back. And people thought it was like a bank. And then you would get a small percentage. So people would put large institutions in the billions and trillions into these instruments. The concept of breaking the buck was, instead of getting their dollar back, they got 2 cents less or whatever. And this was catastrophic for the industry. So when we look at, I've put that technology out there, what would that ripple effect be? Because regulators across the globe are going, what is the ESG aspect of this? What is the AI aspect of this? What is we're looking at, and if we look at how technology is evolving, there is a concern, even the mathematics behind this and the cryptography, how long is that going to hold up? And we have to start looking at quantum computing and other issues. So the regulation behind this, and again, regulation's always going to be behind. The rules that govern cars came after there was loads of cars on the road. Yeah. So there's a catch up, and it's always going to be slower. But things are now moving at a speed that really excites me. And the only time I was in my lifetime, I sent the first emails and people send something back. Then when I saw the impact of AI, I didn't sleep for weeks. But the speed with which things are moving and the changes that we're seeing, we haven't even grasped it yet.
So it's very hard to be general in these answers. It's very specific about what if the fact pattern is that you're looking at, or the piece of technology that you're looking
absolutely.
at.
Yeah. And it's that you're leading now, and that's why I say I come back to that concept of gatekeeper. I'm an Irish regulatory lawyer.
Yep.
So I've some notes again with me today. So if I compare Ireland to other jurisdictions, I can't necessarily speak for those jurisdictions as a lawyer. I'm not qualified in those jurisdictions. So I have to caveat what I'm saying, but that's just based on practical experience. So I'm speaking more like a business person now. So how do we compare Ireland? Ireland, as we've discussed, operates under the European regulatory framework. MiFID II, we've talked about prospectus regulation, MiCA, and guidance from our regulator, Central Bank of Ireland, main regulatory body overseeing approach to Ireland's digital assets. Ireland would be considered cautious, but very much progressive, aligning with the EU, particularly in terms of MiCA, that's the forthcoming markets in crypto assets regulations, and the country's great in terms of innovation initiatives, such as Blockchain Ireland for the development of the blockchain ecosystem. CBI has its innovation hub, which is very well regarded. Now let's compare Estonia. It's renowned for its advanced digital assets infrastructure and an e-residency program, which offers a streamlined process for global entrepreneurs to establish and manage an EU-based company online. Estonia has been proactive in regulating digital assets, providing clear guidelines for blockchain businesses, and makes it a leading jurisdiction for companies seeking regulatory clarity and operational efficiency. Then we can compare that with Malta, albeit that Malta's had a number of issues with certain depository banks, but it's known as the blockchain island in some communities and has implemented specific legislation for digital assets, creating a comprehensive legal framework for blockchain and cryptocurrency ventures. This includes the Malta Digital Innovation Authority Act, and which is an innovative technology arrangements, and the Services Act, and the Virtual Financial Assets Act. So that positions Malta. So there does seem to be a bit of vying among regulators in Europe to be the jurisdiction of choice, because we're seeing this area grow. Now, Singapore.
Maybe before we go to Singapore, just when it comes to actual projects in the real world asset space executed in these geographies, we're still talking about very few.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's interesting. It sounded like I was being a little bit negative on Malta. Again, I'm not a Maltese lawyer, but I have a lot of clients that are ex-Malta that have, come to other places in Europe, including Ireland. And there's a lot of examination around DAOs, but then did they actually come to fruition? Mm-hmm. Or when they went to sort of raise finance, how did that work out in a particular jurisdiction? But I think, we've talked about how things are evolving at such a rapid speed. There were things that held this up because industry was crying out for clear guidance and legislation. And now that that's on track, and if we were having this conversation even 12 months ago, people were going, what is a digital asset? I think that's moved on. So things have moved on rapidly, and there's investment, and there's a clear business case for these types of investment because the traditional models are too expensive, too cumbersome. So we are seeing real projects now, but it's can we get to the scale that it needs to be? And the scale that it needs to be needs, traditional finance rules, but souped up to be best.
This is something I think we talk about a lot in Defactor. We're able, I think, at this stage to bring something that's real and it works, but the scale is missing still.
And I think we're on that cusp because the projects that we're seeing are much larger. And I remember talking about this a year ago at the Blockchain Ireland week. And I remember giving the really bad news. I don't think it went down positively, but I said, approximately 98% of projects are going to collapse. But whatever's left standing, that's a good thing. And, it's only been 12 months.
Well, glad to be standing here with you.
And in that 12 months, the projects that are now expanding, it's not looking at the regulations, actually doing real projects with real money in. And for a lawyer, that's very positive because there's always loads of work when you're looking at regulation, but work that's revenue generating for your client is really positive.
You're going to mention Singapore. I'm interested because there's...
I'm supposed to be spending some time over in Singapore. And
very
again,
nice.
You have to look at security, and that one of my CTO, it's sort of how do we manage even in a law firm the security? What type of phones are we allowed to bring? Laptops, things specialised for these trips. But anyway, whether you're in Singapore or Hong Kong. So it offers Singapore a favourable regulatory regime for fintech, blockchain enterprises, characterised by clear guidelines and a sandbox approach. But again, most of the jurisdictions in Europe and globally do have a sandbox. And we'll come back to sandbox again, and it allows companies to test innovative financial services in a controlled environment. So that's the purpose of a sandbox. And the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, provides a supportive framework for digital assets, making Singapore a leading fintech hub in Asia. Now, the sandbox confuses a lot of business people in multiple jurisdictions because they go, can I actually go out to markets? Do I get exemptions? What does it actually mean? But you have to look at that, sadly, on a case-by-case basis. And
each country's got its own arrangement,
And then on top of this, across globally, you're looking at the business environments, innovation support, so what are we getting from tax incentives? Ireland, again, I'm going to Enterprise Ireland, or what other incentives, what other grants? And this is quite interesting because a lot of my client base, and it's one of the aspects that we do with DH Law, because I mentioned the work as chair for Ireland for the G100, part of our mandate in the firm and what we like to see with our clients is each to have a real ESG mandate. And not a greenwashing, I'm complying with SFDR and European ESG, but what are you actually doing to clean the environment? What are you doing for social? Do people actually have a livable wage? And how are you addressing even basic go clean the streets? So this is something, and now, I should have been dressed a little bit better today, but I've been working with a lot of fashion designers where I had to clear out over 90% of my wardrobe, realising there was a lot of polyester in that. So we're looking at some of this technology for checking down the distribution chain, and it's that global approach where we're looking at bamboo silks in Asia and different things because polyester has been linked to immune problems and other things. If you think one of your largest organs, your skin, and even how we're absorbing some of this. So, there's a lot. There's
a lot to consider. If I could just ask, so looking at all those jurisdictions, is there anything in Ireland that we can't do in terms of RWA, tokenisation of assets?
If we look at Ireland's position within the EU alignment with all the European regulations, so you're looking at MiCA, DORA, all this legislation that's there fit for purpose, MiFID, a very well-regarded regulator who's taken the initiative on. And I keep going back to investment funds as to how Ireland positioned itself as such a small country. It's one of the largest jurisdictions in Europe for investment funds, how well-regarded, and even took the forefront and led the way in terms of interpreting these very complex regulations. And so I think there's that EU alignment. So you'll be sitting here as your EU hub. There's great innovation support between the regulatory sandbox with the Central Bank of Ireland, very well regarded. There's a lot of support between Enterprise Ireland, Department of Finance, very skilled workforce, but also very skilled people that are moving from that asset management space into this area. So bringing those traditional finance and tech into this, very long standing. So that's great. And then market access, access to Europe and great alignment and memorandums of understanding with regulators globally.
Sounds like 2024 is going to be a good year here.
Yeah, and you can sort of raise, absolutely, we're seeing it already. You can raise, there's still some regulatory uncertainty. There's always regulatory uncertainty. You can say competition absolutely is going to heat up because everyone, jurisdictions will be wanting this work. And who's going to adapt to the EU regulations? I mean, Ireland's come out with its position, MiCA and transition periods. So there's a lot to say, Ireland's open for business. MiCA's first tranche June 2024. Companies, we're certainly busy and I'm certainly tired. But it's great to see and it's great for industry in a time of great change, but very positive change as well.
Thank you very much.
Exciting. Thanks very much. That's
Thank
great.
you.
This podcast is for information purposes only and should not be considered as financial advice. Please do your own research